The gleaming spires of the Celestial Institute pierced the lavender clouds of Nexus Prime, their crystalline surfaces refracting the light of 3 distant suns. Inside the Institute's admissions chamber, Director Varric 7 studied the holographic application floating before his 4 eyes with growing apprehension. His central nervous cluster pulsed with unease as he addressed the assembled board of administrators. The candidate's credentials are unprecedented, he admitted, his translucent appendages shifting through shades of concern. Perfect scores in quantum mechanics, advanced materials engineering, and adaptive systems design. But surely we cannot seriously consider. Cannot consider what, Director? The question came from Dr. Kithrix, her insectoid form perfectly still except for the subtle movement of her sensory antennae. Cannot consider accepting a student simply because she comes from a Class 12 deathworld. The chamber filled with the equivalent of uncomfortable coughing from various species. Administrator Zilra's gaseous form condensed slightly in agitation. With respect, Kithrix, humans don't just come from a deathworld. They thrive there. They seek out danger for recreation. Their entertainment involves simulated combat. And yet, Kithrix continued, mandibles clicking thoughtfully, this particular human has designed a revolutionary approach to adaptive shielding that could protect ships during solar storms. She developed it using salvaged parts in what they call a garage, essentially a primitive engineering chamber. The hologram shifted to display Sarah Chen's image, a young human female with short black hair, brown eyes, and what her species called a confident smile. Her application video played, showing her working in said garage, handling plasma tools with bare hands that would burn most species, moving heavy equipment that would require anti-grav assists for others. The risks are unacceptable, Administrator Zilre insisted. Our facilities aren't designed for someone who can actually lift their own equipment. Kithrix's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. For someone who can work through an entire cycle without entering stasis. For someone who might actually advance our understanding of practical engineering rather than theoretical models. Director Varric 7's appendages shifted to a deeper shade of anxiety. Our safety protocols are designed for the most fragile among us. Yes, Kithrix interrupted. But consider this. In the century since humans achieved FTL travel, they've adapted more technology for multi-species use than any other civilization in their development stage. They don't just solve problems, they solve them for everyone. The chamber fell silent as the hologram displayed Sarah's final application statement. I know I'm different from your usual applicants. That's exactly why you need me. I don't just want to learn. I want to help build bridges between species, sometimes literally. 2 cycles later, Sarah Chen stood at the Institute's reception portal, a sturdy Durasteel case in one hand and an ancient paper notebook in the other, a quirk that had already drawn curious stares from the floating crystalline beings serving as orientation guides. Her environmental suit remained packed away, despite the administrator's insistence that she might need it. The atmosphere here was perfectly breathable for humans, if a bit thin. Welcome, Student Chen, came a melodious voice as Dr. Kithrix emerged from a side chamber. I trust your quantum transition was comfortable. Sarah grinned, her enthusiasm virtually radiating from her. It was amazing. I've never experienced quantum tunneling transport before. We still mostly used chemical rockets on Earth for short distances. The phase shift harmonics were incredible. Kithrix's antennae twitched again in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. Most species find their first quantum transition distressing. Oh, I definitely felt like my atoms were doing the cha-cha. Sarah laughed, then quickly added, sorry, Earth dance reference. But it was fascinating. I actually have some ideas about reducing the quantum friction using mechanical dampeners. She was already pulling out her notebook, sketching rapidly with a primitive carbon-based marking tool. Kithrix noticed several other students, a gaseous collective, 3 crystalline beings, and a gravity manipulator, watching from a safe distance, their various sensory organs registering mixture of fear and fascination. Perhaps, Kithrick suggested gently, we should begin with your orientation first. Your assigned living quarters have been specially reinforced. Sarah looked up from her sketching, that confident smile returning. Let me guess, someone was worried I might accidentally break through the walls. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Don't worry, I only do that on Tuesdays, and only if there's a really good engineering reason. The watching students rippled with alarm, apparently missing the humor. Kithrick, however, felt her own mandibles twitch in what was definitely amusement now. This was going to be an interesting academic cycle indeed. As they moved through the crystalline corridors, Sarah's eyes darted everywhere, taking in the quantum field generators, the gravity manipulators, the phase-shifted matter streams that served as data conduits. Her hand never stopped moving across her notebook's pages, drawing diagrams, making calculations, adding observations. Your first class will be Advanced Materials Engineering with Professor Xizam, Kithrick explained. He's particularly interested in your work with adaptive shielding, although he's also particularly concerned about having a human in his laboratory. Because we break things? Sarah asked, still sketching. Because you fix them in ways we've never considered, Kithrick corrected. Sometimes the greatest fear isn't of what might go wrong, but of realizing everything you thought you knew about what was right might need to change. Sarah finally looked up from her notebook, her expression thoughtful. You know, on Earth, we have this old saying, the only constant is change. Maybe that's why we're good at engineering. We're used to adapting. As if to prove her point, a sudden power fluctuation caused the gravity controls to stutter. While other beings quickly activated their personal field generators, Sarah simply adjusted her stance, her legs automatically compensating for the shifting forces. She didn't even stop sketching. Kithrick's antennae quivered with what might have been excitement. Yes, this was going to be a very interesting cycle indeed. Professor Xizam's Advanced Materials Engineering Laboratory pulsed with quantum energies as students worked on their assigned projects. The crystalline walls reflected a kaleidoscope of energy signatures. Each workstation contained within its own safety field, all except one. Sarah Chen stood at her station, safety field conspicuously disabled, hands deep in the guts of a malfunctioning matter reconfiguration unit. Her classmates, a diverse collection of beings from across the galaxy, watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as she manipulated components that should have dissolved organic matter on contact. Student Chen. Professor Xizam's modulated voice carried a note of distress, his gaseous form swirling anxiously. The safety protocols clearly state, with respect, Professor, Sarah interrupted, not looking up from her work. The safety field interferes with the manual calibration process. The electromagnetic resonance throws off the haptic feedback. She made a minor adjustment, and the unit's core began to glow a healthy blue. Besides, human skin is remarkably resistant to quantum radiation. We evolved under a yellow sun. A collective murmur rippled through the laboratory. Ravix, a crystalline student, chimed in harmonic disbelief. You willingly expose yourself to stellar radiation. For recreation. We call it getting a tan. Sarah grinned, finally looking up. Though my dermal melanin levels usually prevent much color change. Professor Xizam's form condensed with concern. The practical examination begins in 10 minutes, without a properly calibrated safety field. Done. Sarah stepped back, wiping her hands on her work suit. The matter reconfiguration unit hummed perfectly, its efficiency readings actually exceeding factory specifications. Had to bypass the quantum harmonizer and install a mechanical governor instead. Sometimes the old ways work best. The practical examination that followed would be discussed in institute corridors for cycles to come. Each student was tasked with developing a new material capable of withstanding extreme conditions. The challenge was designed to test their understanding of quantum engineering principles and their ability to manipulate matter at its most fundamental level. Most students took the traditional approach, using quantum fields to restructure atomic bonds or phase-shifting matter into more resilient states. Their results were predictably excellent, meeting all standard criteria for new material development. Then came Sarah's turn. Student Chen, Professor Xizam announced, "Please demonstrate your material properties." Sarah stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a simple gray cube. No quantum fields surrounded it. No phase shift signatures registered on the laboratory sensors. It appeared, by all sophisticated measures, to be primitive. "I call it adaptive metamaterial hybridization," she explained, placing the cube in the testing chamber. "Instead of forcing matter to maintain a single superior state, I designed it to change its properties based on environmental conditions." The first test began. Extreme heat. The cube's surface shifted, thousands of microscopic structures rearranging themselves like tiny scales. The temperature reading continued to climb, yet the cube remained stable. The surface structure creates a self-reinforcing heat dissipation pattern, Sarah explained as her classmates watched in stunned silence. Based on the same principle that allows Earth's desert-dwelling creatures to survive extreme temperatures. The next test, crushing pressure. Again, the cube's structure shifted, but instead of fighting the force, it seemed to flow with it, redirecting and distributing the pressure through its entire mass. Inspired by how human bones remodel themselves under stress, Sarah added, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. The material learns from exposure, actually getting stronger over time. Professor Xizam's gaseous form had completely stilled, a sign of intense focus. "This is unprecedented. You've created a self-adapting material using purely mechanical principles." "Well, not purely mechanical," Sarah admitted. "There's some quantum engineering involved in the base material composition, but the adaptation mechanism itself, that's all based on biological systems. Nature solved these problems billions of years ago on Earth. I just studied the solutions." The final test was supposed to be material dissolution, exposure to corrosive quantum fields that would break down atomic bonds. Sarah's cube not only survived, it absorbed the energy and used it to power its adaptive processes. "Impossible," whispered Ravix, their crystalline form vibrating with disbelief. "You cannot simply ignore quantum mechanics." "Not ignoring them," Sarah corrected, retrieving her cube, which had now developed a slight iridescent sheen. "Working with them. Sometimes the best way to handle a powerful force isn't to control it, but to dance with it." Professor Xizam's form expanded suddenly, a sign of excitement in his species. "Student Chen, do you understand what you've created? A material that adapts without external control systems, that learns from exposure to hostile conditions." Like I said, Sarah smiled. "I had good teachers. Several billion years of evolution on a death world tends to produce some pretty elegant solutions." She paused, then added, "Though I should mention, this is just the prototype. I have some ideas for improvement." The laboratory erupted in a cacophony of questions and exclamations in multiple languages. Even Rovix had drifted closer, their natural caution overridden by scientific curiosity. Professor Xizam had to emit a harmonic pulse to restore order. "Students, this demonstrates a crucial principle that perhaps we, in our pursuit of quantum perfection, have overlooked. Sometimes the most advanced solution is not the most complex one." Sarah was already scribbling in her notebook, sketching modifications. "Professor, what if we combine this with traditional quantum engineering? Use phase shifting to enhance the adaptive properties, maybe create a hybrid system that..." She trailed off, noticing that several students had gathered around her workstation, their natural fear of the deathworlder completely forgotten in their fascination with the possibilities she'd unveiled. Professor Xizam's form rippled with what might have been pride. "Perhaps, Student Chen, you could enlighten us about these biological solutions you mentioned. It seems we have much to learn from your death world after all." 3 cycles into Sarah Chen's attendance at the Celestial Institute, The impossible happened. The quantum core powering the facility's environmental systems began to destabilize. Warning signals pulsed through the crystalline walls as emergency containment protocols initiated automatically. Sarah was in the middle of a collaborative project with Ravix when the first alarm sounded. The crystalline being's form shimmered with distress as the quantum readings spiraled into chaos. The containment fields are failing. Ravix chimed in alarm. The core's quantum matrix is experiencing cascade entropy. This shouldn't be possible. Sarah was already moving, her notebook forgotten as she pulled up the facility schematics on her datapad. What's the standard procedure for core destabilization? Emergency shutdown and evacuation. Ravix responded, their crystalline form vibrating with increasing anxiety. But the automated systems aren't responding. The quantum interference is too severe. The Institute's corridors had become a chaos of fleeing students and faculty. Energy beings zipped through the walls in panic, while gaseous forms condensed into their emergency states. Through it all, Sarah ran, toward the core chamber, her mind racing through possibilities. Student Chen. Dr. Kithrix's voice cut through the chaos. The insectoid professor was coordinating evacuation efforts. You must leave immediately. The core destabilization will create a quantum singularity that could tear apart the fabric of local space-time. Sarah finished, not slowing down. But before that happens, the environmental systems will fail. How many students here can survive without their specific atmospheric conditions? Kithrix's antennae drooped. None. The evacuation shuttles cannot arrive in time to save everyone. Then we save everyone by stopping this, Sarah stated firmly. She reached the core chamber's entrance, where Professor Xizam and several other faculty members were attempting to establish emergency containment fields. The quantum resonance is too chaotic. Professor Xizam's gaseous form swirled in frustration. We cannot establish stable field harmonics. Sarah studied the readings, her mind connecting dots that others might have missed. Because we're trying to fight quantum chaos with quantum order, she muttered. Then louder. Professor, remember my adaptive material project. This is hardly the time for. He began, but Sarah cut him off. What if we approach this the way life on Earth approaches chaos? Not by fighting it, but by adapting to it. Her fingers flew across the control panel. The core isn't just failing, it's evolving. The quantum matrix is seeking a new stable state, but the containment systems are forcing it to maintain its old pattern. Understanding flickered through Professor Xizam's form. You want to let it destabilize. Controlled destabilization, Sarah corrected. Guide it toward a new equilibrium instead of forcing it back to the old one. But I'll need help. She looked at Ravix, who had followed her despite their fear. Your crystalline resonance could help establish the new harmonic patterns. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Kithrix stepped forward. What do you need us to do? Sarah quickly outlined her plan. It was crazy, dangerous, and completely against every safety protocol in the Institute's database. It was also their only chance. Working together, they began the controlled destabilization. Ravix's crystalline form channeled and redirected quantum energies, while Professor Xizam's gaseous state allowed him to monitor and influence the core's internal conditions. Kithrix's precise manipulations helped maintain crucial balances. And Sarah did what humans had always done best. She adapted on the fly, making split-second decisions and adjustments as new problems arose. When a power surge threatened to overwhelm Ravix's crystalline matrix, she physically interposed herself between them and the energy discharge, her primitive organic body absorbing radiation that would have shattered her friend. Your cellular structure, Ravix chimed in amazement as they recovered. It's already healing from the quantum damage. Human bodies are pretty good at handling radiation. Sarah grimaced, though sweat beaded on her forehead. Just don't tell the medical bay. I hate paperwork. The core's destabilization reached its peak. For one heart-stopping moment, it seemed their plan had failed. Then, slowly, beautiful patterns began emerging in the quantum chaos. The core wasn't just stabilizing. It was reorganizing itself into a more efficient configuration. Remarkable, Professor Xizam breathed, his gaseous form rippling with awe. The quantum matrix has achieved a natural harmonic state. It's actually more stable than before. Sarah slumped against a wall, exhausted but grinning. Like I said, sometimes you have to let systems evolve. Life on Earth taught us that the hard way. You risked molecular dissolution, Cathrix observed, her antennae twitching. The quantum discharge could have destroyed your neural pathways. Yeah, well, Sarah shrugged, then winced. Apparently even human healing had its limits. Someone once told me that the greatest fear isn't of what might go wrong, but of realizing everything you thought you knew about what was right might need to change. Cathrix's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. Using my own words against me. Student Chen. Not against you, Sarah corrected, accepting Ravix's help to stand. With you. All of you. That's kind of the point, isn't it? As emergency teams finally arrived to secure the core chamber, Sarah noticed something remarkable. None of the beings around her were maintaining their usual safety distance. In fact, Ravix's crystalline form was still supporting her weight, their natural fear of the deathworlder completely forgotten in the wake of their shared triumph. Professor Xizam's form swirled thoughtfully. Perhaps, he mused, we have been too focused on controlling chaos rather than understanding it. Your Earth must be a remarkable teacher. Earth isn't the teacher, Sarah said softly, watching the new quantum patterns dance through the core. Life is. And life, no matter where it comes from, always finds a way to adapt. In the wake of the quantum core incident, the Celestial Institute underwent a transformation that went far beyond its newly stabilized power systems. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of a scientific revolution, though not in the way anyone might have expected. It began in Professor Xizam's Advanced Materials Engineering Lab, where Sarah's workstation had become an unlikely gathering point for students of various species. Ravix's crystalline form sparkled next to a collective of gaseous beings called the Mist Core, while energy-based students hovered nearby, all watching as Sarah sketched out her latest idea. The problem with traditional environmental suits, she explained, her pencil flying across paper, is that they treat environmental hazards as enemies to be blocked out. But what if we treated them as potential resources instead? Clarification requested, hummed the Mist Choir in their harmonious collective voice. How does one utilize harmful elements as resources? Sarah held up her notebook, showing a design that merged multiple alien physiologies with human adaptability. Look at how Ravix's crystalline structure naturally channels and redirects energy, or how your gaseous form can disperse and recondense to manage pressure changes. What if we combine these principles with human endurance and regenerative capabilities? Professor Xizam's form swirled with interest as he approached. You propose a hybrid environmental system. Better, Sarah grinned. A collaborative one. Each species' natural adaptations working together to create something entirely new. She turned to Ravix. Remember how you helped channel the quantum energies during the core crisis? Imagine that principle applied to personal protection systems. The laboratory soon became a hub of cross-species collaboration. Ravix's crystalline expertise in energy manipulation merged with the Mist Choir's understanding of fluid dynamics. Energy beings contributed their knowledge of phase transitions, while Sarah's practical understanding of biological adaptation tied everything together. The prototype they created was unlike anything the Institute had seen before. It wasn't just a protective suit. It was a living system that learned and adapted, drawing on the strengths of multiple species to overcome individual weaknesses. Remarkable, Dr. Cathrix observed during a demonstration. Her antennae twitched as she watched a student wearing the prototype move easily through environments that should have been lethal to their species. You've turned physiological limitations into advantages. Sarah beamed with pride. but quickly redirected the praise. It was Rovix who figured out how to incorporate crystalline lattices into the base structure, and the Mist Core's understanding of gas exchange systems was crucial for the atmospheric adaptation components. The project's success sparked a wave of similar collaborations across the Institute. Students who had once avoided contact with their incompatible peers now sought each other out, eager to explore how their differences could become strengths. In the quantum mechanics department, energy beings worked with solid-form species to develop new theories about matter-energy interaction. The medical bay became a laboratory for studying how different species' healing mechanisms could complement each other. Even the Institute's architecture began to change, with spaces being redesigned to accommodate and encourage multi-species interaction. One afternoon, Sarah found herself in a heated but friendly debate with a group of students about the nature of adaptation itself. The discussion had drawn quite a crowd, with beings of all forms contributing their perspectives. "But how can you be certain of success when attempting something unprecedented?" asked a young energy being named Pulse. "The risk of failure is part of the process," Sarah completed. "On Earth, we have this concept called trial and error. Every failure teaches us something new. It's how we evolved, how we learned to survive on our death world. We fall down, we get back up, we try again, but smarter this time." Like the quantum core, Ravix chimed in. "We succeeded not because we had a perfect solution, but because we were willing to adapt our approach when the traditional methods failed." The Mist Core swirled thoughtfully. "This explains much about human persistence. You do not fear failure because you view it as a form of success." "Exactly." Sarah's eyes lit up. "And now think about how powerful it becomes when we combine it with your species' strengths. Your perfect harmony." She gestured to the Mist Core, Ravix's structural precision, Pulse's energy manipulation. "Together, we're not just overcoming our limitations, we're turning them into innovations." Professor Xizam, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Student Chen, when you first arrived, we saw only the dangers of your death world heritage. We failed to recognize that surviving such conditions might foster not just physical resilience, but intellectual adaptability as well. And we humans," Sarah admitted, "sometimes forget that there's more than one way to be strong. Working here, with all of you, has taught me that true resilience comes from cooperation, not just survival." As if to emphasize her point, a minor power fluctuation rippled through the room. Without hesitation, Ravix channeled the excess energy, the Mist Core regulated the atmospheric disturbance, and Sarah quickly adjusted the environmental controls, each acting instinctively to support the others. Dr. Kithrix, watching from the doorway, clicked her mandibles in satisfaction. Perhaps, she mused, this is what the Institute was always meant to be. Not a place where differences are merely tolerated, but where they are celebrated as opportunities for growth. The revelation spread through the Institute like a quantum wave. The very differences that had once caused fear and separation were becoming the foundation of unprecedented advancement. And at the heart of it all was a human who had turned the label of deathworlder into a badge of honor, not through force or fear, but through the very human traits of curiosity, adaptability, and an unwavering belief in the power of working together. "You know what the really exciting part is?" Sarah asked her friends as they left the discussion session. "We're just getting started. Think of all the possibilities we haven't even discovered yet." Ravix's crystalline form shimmered with what had become recognizable as enthusiasm. "With your human optimism, Student Chen, those possibilities seem infinite." "Not just my optimism," Sarah corrected with a smile. "Our combined potential. After all, the best innovations happen when different worlds collide." The announcement came near the end of the academic cycle. The Galactic Science Council would be visiting the Celestial Institute to evaluate a series of breakthrough innovations. What made this particular visit historic was that, for the first time, the Council would be reviewing projects developed through multi-species collaboration. The Institute's Grand Hall, usually segmented by environmental requirements, had been transformed. Sarah Chen's adaptive environmental systems allowed beings of all species to share the same space comfortably. The crystalline walls pulsed with a gentle light that Ray Vix had designed to be soothing to all known forms of sensory perception. "Are you nervous?" Keith Ricks asked, finding Sarah making final adjustments to their presentation materials. "Terrified," Sarah admitted with a characteristically human laugh. "But you know what they say on Earth. Being scared and being ready aren't mutually exclusive." The council members arrived in a procession of environmental suits and protective fields, only to stop in surprise at the sight of different species mingling freely in the hall. A gaseous council member condensed in shock as an energy being passed directly through a crystalline student without either showing signs of distress. Director Varric 7, who had once opposed Sarah's admission, now stood proudly before the council. "Honored members, welcome to the new Celestial Institute. We have much to show you." The presentations began. The Mist Corps, working with solid form students, demonstrated new techniques for quantum energy storage that mimicked biological processes. Energy beings and crystalline students presented revolutionary theories on matter-energy conversion inspired by human cellular respiration. Then came the centerpiece, Sarah Chen and Ray Vix's presentation on adaptive cross-species technology. But instead of a formal demonstration, they did something unprecedented. "Rather than tell you about our work," Sarah announced, "we'd like to show you. With your permission, we'd like to remove all environmental controls in this hall." The council members rippled with alarm, but before they could object, Ray Vix added, "The safety systems we've developed don't just protect against hostile environments. They create environments where all species can thrive together." After a tense moment of deliberation, the council gave their approval. Sarah nodded to Professor Xizam, who initiated the shutdown sequence. As the traditional environmental systems powered down, something remarkable happened. The air shimmered with crystalline matrices that automatically adjusted to each being's needs. Gaseous forms found themselves able to maintain cohesion without conscious effort. Energy beings discovered they could interact with physical matter without phase disruption. "The system adapts to each user," Sarah explained, walking through a group of various species. "It learns from our differences and turns them into advantages, just like we did." "Impossible," breathed one council member, their energy form flickering with disbelief. "The physiological requirements are too diverse." "That's what we thought too," Ray Vix chimed. "Until Student Chen taught us to stop seeing diversity as a problem to solve and start seeing it as a solution waiting to be discovered." Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "When I first came to the Institute, everyone focused on the fact that I came from a death world. But surviving on Earth taught humanity something crucial. Adaptation isn't about becoming tough enough to survive alone. It's about becoming smart enough to work together." She gestured to her friends, crystalline, gaseous, energy, and dozens of other forms. "Every species here has something unique to offer. The real breakthrough wasn't in the technology we developed, but in learning to combine our strengths. My human adaptability, Ray Vix's crystalline precision, the Mist Corps' collective intelligence. Together, we're not just surviving. We're evolving." The council members were silent for a long moment. Finally, the head counselor spoke. "In all our cycles of evaluation, we have never seen anything like this. You haven't just advanced technology. You've advanced the very nature of interspecies cooperation." Director Varric 7's appendages glowed with pride. Perhaps it took a deathworlder to teach us that the greatest danger isn't in our differences, but in our failure to embrace them. As the council moved through the hall, examining the various innovations, Sarah found herself surrounded by her friends. The beings she had once been warned to keep at a safe distance were now as close as family. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "back on Earth, there's this old saying, 'Life finds a way.' I used to think it just meant survival, but now I understand. Life doesn't just find a way to continue. It finds a way to connect, to grow, to become more than it was." Professor Xizam's gaseous form swirled contentedly. And thanks to you, Student Chen, we now understand that true intelligence isn't measured by how well we can isolate ourselves from challenges, but by how well we can adapt to face them together. Not thanks to me, Sarah corrected, watching as more students and council members gathered around their innovations. Thanks to us. After all, that's the greatest lesson humanity learned on our death world. The strongest survivals aren't always the ones who can endure alone, but the ones who learn to thrive together. As the day drew to a close, the Celestial Institute stood as a testament to a new era of galactic cooperation. The fear of the deathworlder had transformed into an appreciation for the adaptability, resilience, and collaborative spirit that Earth's harsh conditions had fostered in its children. And in the improved quantum core, now stable and more efficient than ever, patterns of energy danced in perfect harmony, different forms working together to create something greater than the sum of their parts, just like the beings who had learned to call this place home. The deathworlder experiment hadn't just succeeded. It had evolved into something far more significant, a proof that the greatest achievements come not from overcoming our differences, but from learning to thrive because of them.